A child's hand, pale and small, presses a shard of dragonglass into a man's chest. His eyes turn from brown to ice blue. He screams, but no sound escapes. The first weapon is born, but it will not obey. 40 dragons circle the sky above Valyria, their shadows turning day into dusk. Fire rains down. Empires bow. Then in a single night, the ground opens. The dragons fall. The screams echo across the ocean. Magic dies with them. A girl walks into fire. The world holds its breath. 3 eggs crack open, and suddenly, every flame across the known world burns brighter. Dead candles ignite in distant towers. Priests see visions they haven't seen in 150 years. And in the frozen north, blue eyes open in the darkness. For 8,000 years, magic shaped the fate of Westeros and Essos. It raised walls that touched the clouds. It melted castles into rivers of stone. It turned men into monsters and monsters into legends. Then it vanished. Not slowly, not quietly, but all at once, as if the world exhaled and forgot how to breathe wonder. But magic never truly dies. It only sleeps, and when it wakes hungry. Tonight we journey through the complete timeline of magic in the world of Game of Thrones, from the children of the forest who sang to the trees, to the Valyrian dragon lords who commanded fire itself, from the long night that nearly ended all life, to the moment 3 dragons returned and changed everything. Hey everyone! Before we begin this epic journey through sorcery and power, take a moment to like this video and subscribe if you enjoy deep dives into the magical histories of your favorite worlds. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always amazing to see our community spanning the globe. Now settle in, dim the lights, maybe turn on that fan for some soothing background noise. Get comfortable in your blanket, and let's step into a world where magic is memory, where dragons are weapons, and where the line between salvation and destruction is thinner than a Valyrian blade. 12,000 years before Aegon Targaryen would conquer Westeros, before the Iron Throne existed, before men even knew what a kingdom was, the land belonged to a different race entirely. The children of the forest were small, barely reaching the chest of a grown man, with delicate features and eyes that seemed too large for their faces. But in those eyes lay power that would reshape continents. They were the first magic users, the first to understand that the world itself was alive, conscious, listening. Their magic was woven into the very fabric of nature. They could slip their consciousness into animals, seeing through a raven's eyes, running with a wolf's legs, swimming with a fish's gills. This was skin-changing, the art of wearing another creature's skin while your own body lay sleeping. Among them, the rarest and most powerful were the Greases, individuals who could do something even more extraordinary. They could see through the weirwood trees. The weirwoods were unlike any other tree in the known world. White bark, blood-red leaves, and faces carved deep into their trunks. These faces were not decoration. They were eyes. The children had discovered that the weirwood trees formed a network, an ancient web of consciousness spanning the entire continent. A greenseer could close their eyes beside one weirwood and open them, looking through another 1,000 miles away. Even more impossible, they could look backward through time itself, witnessing events long past as clearly as if they stood there in person. Westeros in this age was a land of wonder and terror in equal measure. Giants walked the forests, true giants, 20 feet tall with crude intelligence and enormous strength. Direwolves the size of ponies hunted in packs. Mammoths thundered across frozen plains. The children lived in harmony with this magical ecosystem, taking only what they needed, speaking to the trees, listening to the land. Then from across the eastern sea came the first men. They crossed a land bridge called the Arm of Dawn, fleeing conflicts and seeking new territory. They brought bronze axes, bronze swords, and they brought fear. The weirwood trees terrified them. Those watching faces seemed demonic, unnatural, so they cut them down. Hundreds, then thousands of weirwood trees fell to bronze axes. The children watched their sacred network being destroyed, tree by tree, face by face. War erupted. Bronze weapons against nature magic. The children commanded the earth itself to fight. They shattered the arm of dawn, turning the land bridge into a scatter of islands, trapping thousands of first men on the wrong side of the newly formed sea. But still more kept coming. The war raged for generations, neither side able to claim final victory. Eventually, exhausted and desperate, both races met at the Isle of Faces, a sacred island covered in weirwood trees. There, they forged the pact. The children would keep the deep forests, men would take the open lands, the weirwoods would be left standing, their faces left uncarved in the south, but sacred in the north. Peace came to Westeros. The Age of Heroes began, but in the far north, beyond where any child or first man had yet explored, something ancient stirred in the endless ice. Something that would soon teach both races the meaning of true terror. 8,000 years before Aegon's landing, the sun rose one morning and then failed to rise again. The long night began not with drama, but with absence. Dawn simply didn't come. People waited, confused at first, then concerned, then terrified, as hours became days, days became weeks, and the darkness refused to lift. This wasn't an eclipse. This wasn't a storm. This was something fundamentally wrong with the world itself. From the lands of always winter, a place so far north that even the children of the forest feared to venture there, came creatures that would haunt humanity's nightmares for millennia. The others, some called them White Walkers, tall, gaunt figures with skin pale as milk and eyes like blue stars. They wore armor that seemed crafted from ice itself, carried blades that glowed with cold light. When those swords struck steel, the metal shattered like glass. When they touched flesh, it froze solid. But their weapons were not their greatest horror. The dead rose at their command. Every fallen warrior became a soldier in their army. Every slaughtered village added hundreds more to their ranks. The Whites, as these reanimated corpses were called, felt no pain, no fear, no exhaustion. An army that grew stronger with every battle, while their enemies grew weaker. Humanity faced extinction. The first men fought desperately. The children of the forest emerged from their forests to fight beside them. Ancient enemies became brothers against a common threat that would erase them both. And still the darkness spread. Winter followed the White Walkers like a loyal hound. Temperatures plunged to levels that killed simply by existing. Entire bloodlines vanished overnight, frozen in their homes. In the caves beyond the wall, in a place humanity would later lose and then rediscover thousands of years hence, a terrible truth was hidden. The children of the forest held a secret that would change everything. They had created the first White Walker. During their war with the first men, when bronze axes were cutting down their weirwoods and children were dying by the hundreds, desperation drove them to an act they would regret for eternity. They captured a first man, one of their enemies, and bound him to a weirwood tree. Leaf, one of the children who would survive to see the present day, was there. She would later speak of it with something humans would recognize as shame. We were at war. We were being slaughtered. Our sacred trees were falling. We needed a weapon. The ritual was blood magic of the darkest kind. A dragonglass dagger, obsidian sharp enough to split a hair, was driven into the captive man's heart. His screams tore through the forest. His eyes, brown like rich earth, drained of color and refilled with ice blue. The transformation rippled through his body. His skin paled, his blood cooled. His humanity burned away like morning frost under a sun that would not rise again. The Night King was born. But the children had made a catastrophic error. They created a weapon they could not control. The Night King possessed his own will, his own terrible intelligence, his own hunger. He could create more of his kind, transforming living humans into White Walkers with a single touch. He commanded ice and cold itself. Where he walked, winter followed. Where he gestured, blizzards formed. And most terrifying of all, he could raise the dead with a simple lifting of his arms. The weapon turned on its creators. The long night lasted a generation. Children born in darkness grew to adulthood, never seeing the sun. Stories from that time, preserved in fragments across both Westeros and Essos, speak of horrors that defy imagination. In Westeros, tales tell of the last hero, a warrior who set out with 12 companions, a dog, and a horse to seek help from the children of the forest. One by one his companions died. His horse froze, his dog died defending him. He alone reached the children, and what bargain was struck there, history does not record. In Essos, the legend speaks of a hero named Azor Ahai, a warrior who understood that only magic could defeat magic. He set out to forge a weapon capable of fighting the darkness. His first attempt ended when he tempered the blade in water. The sword shattered. His second attempt involved driving the blade through a lion's heart. Again the sword broke. Finally, in the ultimate act of sacrifice, he called his wife Nissa to him. With tears streaming down his face, he drove the blade through her heart. Her scream of pain and betrayal echoed across the world. Her blood and her soul and her sacrifice infused the blade with magic. It burst into flames that never extinguished. Lightbringer was born. The battle for the dawn brought together every living soul who could hold a weapon. First men and children fighting side by side, their old hatreds meaningless in the face of extinction. Somehow, through sacrifice and courage, and perhaps through magic humans barely understood, they drove the White Walkers back, not destroyed, not killed, but forced into retreat, pushed into the furthest north where the cold was eternal and the sun never truly rose even in summer. A man named Brandon Stark, who would be remembered as Bran the Builder, raised a wall. Not a wall of stone, though stone would have been impressive enough. A wall of ice, 700 feet tall, stretching 300 miles from coast to coast. How such a thing was accomplished became the subject of legend. Some said the children wove their magic into its foundation. Others claimed giants helped with the construction, their enormous strength lifting blocks of ice that no human could move. Perhaps both were true. The wall was more than physical barrier. Ancient spells were woven into the ice itself. The dead could not pass. White Walker magic failed against it. It stood as humanity's shield, and to guard it, an order was founded, the Night's Watch, men who swore an oath to hold the wall until their deaths. I am the sword in the darkness. I am the watcher on the walls. I am the shield that guards the realms of men. The White Walkers vanished into the frozen wastes. The long night ended. The sun returned. Life continued, but the children of the forest knew something that humans would forget over the following millennia. The White Walkers were not destroyed. They were only sleeping, and sleep is not death. Sleep eventually ends. The question was not if they would return. The question was when and whether humanity would remember the lessons of the long night when that day finally came. In the warm centuries that followed, as generations passed and the terror faded into legend, people began to doubt. Had the long night truly lasted years? Had the White Walkers truly existed? Or were they simply stories told to frighten children into good behavior? The wall remained massive and undeniable. But walls can be built for many reasons. Memory is fragile. Truth becomes myth. Myth becomes fairy tale. And fairy tales are not real, except when they are. The 6,000 years following the long night became known as the Age of Heroes, and with good reason. Magic had not died with the White Walkers' retreat. If anything, it flourished. The world had been tested by darkness, and found wanting, but not destroyed. Now came the time of legends, when humans learned to wield the powers that had nearly destroyed them. Brandon the Builder did not stop with the wall. His name appears in the founding of nearly every major structure in Westeros, to the point where historians debate whether one man could have accomplished so much, or if Brandon the Builder was actually a title passed down through generations. Either way, the works attributed to him defy normal explanation. Winterfell, the ancient seat of House Stark, was built over natural hot springs that kept the castle warm even in the deepest winter. The castle's walls were said to be infused with magic, though whether this was true or simply excellent engineering, no one could say with certainty. What was certain was that Winterfell had stood for thousands of years while other castles crumbled. Storm's End, the great fortress of the Stormlands, possessed walls so thick and so strong that no siege engine could crack them, no storm could damage them. Legend said that Brandon the Builder raised the castle with help from the children of the forest, who wove protective spells into the very stone. A different story claimed that giants helped lift the massive blocks into place. Perhaps both were true, perhaps neither. But Storm's End had withstood countless sieges and the greatest storms the narrow sea could throw at it, and its walls had never fallen. The Wolf's Den, the Hightower's foundations, various other structures scattered across Westeros, all attributed to Brandon the Builder, all standing thousands of years later, all touched by something that felt like more than human hands alone could accomplish. But Brandon's greatest legacy was his bloodline. House Stark carried something in their blood that set them apart, the ability to slip their consciousness into animals, to see through other eyes, to run on four legs while their body lay sleeping, skinging. It ran strongest in those who kept the old gods, who prayed before weirwood trees, who remembered the pact between the first men and the children. Most skin changers could bond with a single animal in their lifetime. A wolf, a hawk, a shadow cat. The bond was deep, intimate, a sharing of two souls. When the animal died, part of the skin changer died with it. But among the Starks, the gift ran particularly strong. Some could bond with multiple creatures, some could switch between them. The direwolf became their sigil, their identity, their other self. Radder still were the Greenseers. Only one skin changer in 1,000 had this gift. They could do what the children of the forest had done. They could see through the weirwood trees, past, present, all flowing together in the vision of those carved faces. They could watch events from centuries ago as clearly as if they stood there. They became living repositories of history, of truth that could not be altered or forgotten. The weirwood network remained intact, strongest in the north where the old ways persisted, weaker in the south where the Andals would later come and cut down most of the heart trees. But in that age, the trees watched everything. Memory was never lost. Truth was always available to those who knew how to look. Other legendary figures rose during this age, each touched by magic in different ways. Lan the Clever, founder of House Lannister, reportedly won Casterly Rock without spilling a drop of blood. The stories vary. Some say he used tunnels and tricks to make the Casterly family believe the rock was haunted. Others whisper of glamours and illusions, of magic that made him appear as ghost or demon. Whatever the truth, a penniless adventurer became lord of the wealthiest castle in Westeros through cunning that might have been enhanced by more than natural wit. In the Reach, Garth Greenhand was said to possess magic connected to fertility and growth itself. Where he walked, crops grew taller. Where he smiled, flowers bloomed. His bloodline spread across the Reach through dozens of children, each carrying a fraction of his gift. The green and growing magic of the Reach, its endless harvests and prosperity, were attributed to him. Whether he was one man or a title or a god made flesh, his influence shaped a kingdom. The Grey King of the Iron Islands claimed to have taken a mermaid as wife and commanded creatures of the sea. He supposedly lived for 1,000 years and fathered 100 sons, obvious exaggeration, but perhaps built on a kernel of truth. The Ironborn have always had a different relationship with the sea. Some Meisters theorize limited bloodlines capable of holding their breath far longer than normal humans, of swimming in waters cold enough to kill others, magic, or simply human adaptation pushed to its limits. Durin, God's grief, earned his name by defying the gods themselves. He fell in love with the daughter of the sea god and the wind goddess. When he married her, her divine parents were enraged and sent storms to destroy him. 6 times he built a castle. 6 times the storms tore it down. Finally, on his 7th attempt, either the gods grew tired of testing him, or he received help from the children of the forest, or Brandon the builder. Storm's end rose, and this time it stood. The gods threw their worst at it. The walls held. Sometimes mortal stubbornness defeats divine wrath. In dawn, a white meteor fell from the sky and crashed at a place that would become known as Starfall. House Dane forged the metal from that fallen star into a great sword called Dawn. It glowed pale as milk glass, supposedly as sharp as Valyrian steel, though crafted millennia before Valyria rose. Whatever fell from the heavens, it brought something with it. Dawn was passed down through House Dane for thousands of years, given only to knights worthy of the title Sword of the Morning, magic from beyond the sky. The Isle of Faces remained sacred ground, untouched by time. Green men, mysterious beings who might have been children of the forest, or might have been humans who learned their ways, guarded the weirwood grove where the pact was signed. No one knew what they truly were. They allowed no visitors. They performed rituals that predated human kingdoms. The magic there was older, purer, and more dangerous than anything else in Westeros. As generations passed and centuries accumulated, the children of the forest gradually retreated from human lands. Their numbers had never recovered from their war with the First Men, and then the Long Night. They withdrew deeper into the forests, higher into the mountains, further beyond the wall. Contact became rare, then legendary, then mythical. By the time the Andals invaded Westeros thousands of years later, most humans believed the children had never existed at all, just stories, just myths. But the Starks remembered. The North always remembered. Their words were not a boast. Winter is coming was not a threat to enemies. It was a reminder, a warning, a promise to never forget the Long Night, the White Walkers, the price of forgetting. As the centuries passed and the South forgot, the North maintained their vigil. They kept the old gods. They prayed before weirwood trees. They remembered that magic was real, that winter could last a lifetime, that the darkness could return. Magic during this age was woven into the fabric of society. Not common, but accepted. Not understood, but respected. Those with gifts were valued, sometimes feared, but never dismissed as frauds. The world knew its own nature, and that nature included wonder alongside terror. But magic was already beginning its first slow fade. The children were vanishing. Gracies became rarer. The weirwood trees in the south were being cut down one by one. The old ways were giving ground to new religions, new kingdoms, new ways of thinking that had less room for mystery. Far across the Eastern Ocean, in a land called Essos, something else was stirring. In a volcanic peninsula, shepherds had discovered creatures nesting in the mountains, creatures that would change the world, creatures that would give magic a new, terrible source of power. Dragons. 5,000 years before Aegon would conquer Westeros, on a peninsula in southern Essos, shepherds discovered something impossible. In the chain of volcanic mountains called the 14 Flames, where the earth itself was angry and molten rock flowed like water, dragons made their home. These were not the first dragons to exist. Ancient texts from Yi-Tasht speak of dragons in their distant past. The children of the forest had legends of ice dragons in the far north. But these were the first dragons that humans successfully bonded with, and that bond would reshape civilization itself. The Valyrians were not content to merely marvel at dragons from a safe distance. They wanted to command them. They wanted to become dragon lords, so they turned to blood magic. The specifics of the bonding ritual were secrets guarded more carefully than gold, more jealously than power. What is known is this: the Valyrians mixed their own blood with dragon blood through sorcerous means. They altered themselves at a fundamental level, creating a magical compatibility between human and beast. Only certain bloodlines could survive the process. Those who succeeded became something more than human. Those who failed died screaming as their bodies rejected the dragon magic. 40 families rose to dominance as dragon lords. They did not crown kings. Instead, they formed the Valyrian Freehold, a council of sorcerer aristocrats, each commanding at least one dragon. The greatest among them rode beasts large enough to darken the sky. Balerion the Black Dread, who would later serve Aegon Targaryen, was born in Valyria and was already ancient before the Doom. Dragons could live for centuries if not killed. They never stopped growing. The oldest became flying fortresses, capable of destroying armies with a single pass. With dragons came an empire. The Valyrians expanded across Essos with fire and blood, exactly as Aegon would later use in Westeros. Their dragons could melt castles, boil rivers, turn sand into glass. No conventional army could stand against them. The old empire of Giz, powerful and ancient, fielded enormous legions trained in formations that had conquered half a continent. The Valyrians burned them 5 separate times across 5 brutal wars. Giz fell. Its people were enslaved. Its culture was erased. Dragons do not negotiate. But the Valyrians were not simply conquerors with flying weapons. They were perhaps the greatest sorcerers humanity had ever produced. Their mastery of magic extended far beyond dragon bonding. Valyrian steel became legendary across the world. The process of creating it required dragon fire and blood sacrifice, though the exact method was a secret known only to smiths in Valyria. The resulting metal was lighter than normal steel, sharper than any blade thought possible, and held an edge that never dulled. Thousands of Valyrian steel weapons were forged during the Freehold's 5,000 years of dominance. When Valyria fell, the knowledge died with the smiths. Only 227 blades survived into the present age, scattered across Westeros and Essos, priceless beyond measure. Great houses passed them down as treasures, wars were fought over them, and as humanity would later discover, they possessed another quality. They could kill White Walkers, slicing through magical ice flesh where normal steel shattered. The Dragon Road stretched across continents, fused stone highways that never cracked, never developed potholes, never needed maintenance, even thousands of years after they were built. The secret of their construction died with Valyria. Modern engineers could not replicate them. The best theory involved using dragonfire at precise temperatures combined with earth magic, but no one knew for certain. Valyrian architecture defied conventional engineering. Buildings soared to heights that should have collapsed under their own weight. Towers twisted in ways that seemed to mock gravity. The stone itself was often fused black or red, smooth as glass, stronger than granite. Earthquakes that leveled other cities barely cracked Valyrian buildings. Dragon fire that melted other fortresses left Valyrian structures intact. The magic was in the very material. Glass candles represented perhaps their most mysterious achievement. Made from dragon glass, obsidian, these candles burned without fuel and never melted. But their true purpose was not illumination. A glass candle allowed communication across vast distances. 2 people at separate candles could speak as if in the same room. Even more impossible, the flames showed visions, truth, not fantasy. A person gazing into a glass candle could see distant events as they happened, could sometimes glimpse possible futures. The candles required magical energy to function. When magic was strong, they burned bright. When magic weakened, they went dark. After the Doom, Every glass candle in the world went out and stayed out for over a century. Pyromancy, the art of seeing visions in flames, was perfected in Valyria. Fire showed fragments of what might come. The future was never certain, always shifting based on choices not yet made, but fire could reveal possibilities. Dragon dreams, hereditary visions that came during sleep, became common in Dragon Lord families. Some dismissed these dreams as meaningless. Others paid attention and changed the course of their lives. One such dreamer was Daenys Targaryen, who would be remembered forever as Daenys the Dreamer. 12 years before the Doom, Daenys began having nightmares. She saw Valyria drowning in fire. She saw the peninsula breaking apart. She saw dragons falling from the sky, their wings ablaze. She saw her family dying. The visions were consistent, overwhelming, impossible to ignore. She told her father, Aenar Targaryen, lord of a relatively minor Dragon Lord family. Most fathers would have dismissed the dreams of a young girl. Aenar believed her. He made a decision that would be mocked across Valyria. He sold all his holdings in the freehold. He packed up his entire household. He took his 5 dragons and sailed west to Dragonstone, a fortress on an island off the coast of Westeros. The other Dragon Lords laughed, whispered that House Targaryen had grown weak, cowardly, running from shadows. Abandoning the center of civilization for a cold rock in a barbarian land, the mockery lasted 12 years. Then it stopped forever. In the year 102 before Aegon's conquest, the Doom came to Valyria. What exactly happened remains debated even centuries later. The 14 flames, the volcanic chain that gave Valyria its power, erupted simultaneously. But this was not a natural volcanic eruption. The destruction was too complete, too perfect, too magical. Theories multiplied, but none could be proven. Some believe the Faceless Men, a cult of assassins who had originated as escaped slaves from Valyrian mines, sabotaged the fire mages who kept the volcanoes stable. Revenge for centuries of slavery. Others think the blood magic that powered Valyrian society finally reached critical mass, destabilizing the earth itself. Still others whisper of deliberate weapons, of Dragon Lord families feuding unto mutual destruction, of spells that escaped control. Whatever the cause, the effect was apocalyptic. The ground shattered. Volcanic fire consumed everything. The sea rushed in. The entire Valyrian peninsula broke apart and sank, becoming a cursed body of water called the Smoking Sea. Sailors who ventured there reported demons, visions, madness. The water itself was poisonous. The air was thick with ash and toxic gas. Valyria had become hell on earth, and it would remain that way forever. Every Dragon Lord family died. Hundreds of dragons perished. Thousands of years of accumulated magical knowledge, scrolls, techniques, rituals, all burned or drowned or lost. The greatest magical civilization humanity had ever achieved was erased in a single day. House Targaryen alone survived, safe on Dragonstone with their 5 dragons. Daenys the Dreamer had saved them, though she would not live to see Aegon's conquest. Her visions had given her family a future while everyone else burned. The magical consequences were immediate and worldwide. The glass candles went dark in every city that possessed them. Menesters in distant Oldtown noted the exact moment the candle in the citadel extinguished. Warlocks in Qarth felt their powers diminish dramatically overnight. Red priests in Ashai saw their flames cloud with uncertainty. Magic didn't die, but it weakened severely. Dragons had been the wellspring, the engine that powered sorcery across the world. With hundreds of dragons dead and only a handful surviving on Dragonstone, magic entered a steep decline. The century of blood followed the Doom. Valyrian colonial cities fought each other for dominance. Volantis, Tyrosh, Lys, Myrris. Each thought they could become the new Valyria. None succeeded. The Dothraki hordes swept across the grasslands of central Essos, unimpeded by dragons for the first time in millennia. The power vacuum consumed thousands of lives and achieved nothing. No one could rebuild what was lost. House Targaryen remained on Dragonstone, isolated, diminished, but possessing something no one else in the world had: dragons. 5 became 4. 4 became 3. The population shrank over the century, following the doom, but the bloodline persisted. They were the last Dragon Lords, the last family that could bond with dragons, the last keepers of Valyrian magic. And one of them, a man named Aegon, would look across the narrow sea at the fractured kingdoms of Westeros and decide that 3 dragons were enough to conquer a continent. Magic was fading, the old powers were dying, but before they disappeared entirely, one last great conquest remained. One last chance to prove that dragons could still change the world. Fire and blood were coming to Westeros. While Valyria burned and its peninsula sank into the poisoned sea, older forms of magic persisted in the darker corners of Essos. These traditions had existed long before the Dragon Lords rose, and they would continue long after the doom turned Valyria into a graveyard. At the eastern edge of the known world sits Asshai, a city that feels wrong, built entirely of black stone that predates any known civilization. It sprawls along the banks of the Ash River, where the water runs dark and oily. The buildings tower overhead, massive and oppressive. No children are born in Asshai. Everyone who lives there came from somewhere else, drawn by the promise of forbidden knowledge, or fleeing from crimes too terrible for other cities to forgive. The sun never seems to shine properly there. Even at noon, shadows cling to the streets like living things. Shadowbinders practice their art in Ashai's temples and private chambers. Their magic is blood magic in its purest, darkest form. They have mastered the creation of shadow assassins, entities birthed from their own life force through rituals that combine sex magic with enormous personal cost. The process drains the caster, aging them, weakening them. Each shadow takes years from their life, but the result is an assassin that can slip through the smallest crack, that cannot be stopped by guards or walls, that kills and vanishes, leaving no evidence except a corpse. Melisandre of Asshai, who would later serve Stannis Baratheon and play a crucial role in the wars to come, trained in these shadow arts for decades, possibly for centuries. Her true age remained hidden behind a glamour sustained by the ruby choker she always wore. Without it, she was ancient, withered, sustained only by the magic she had absorbed over a lifetime of study. She could birth shadow assassins, see visions in flames, resist poisons that would kill normal humans instantly, and survive without food or water for lengths of time that defied nature. Beyond Asshai lies Stygai, the corpse city. Even shadowbinders fear to enter it. What horrors dwell there? What knowledge might be found in its ruins? No one knows. Those who venture to Stygai do not return. The City of Night keeps its secrets. The Red Priests and Priestesses of R'hll, the Lord of Light, also study in Asshai before spreading across the world to establish temples. Their faith divides existence into a simple dualism: light against dark, fire against ice, life against death. The Lord of Light battles eternally against the Great Other, and all of creation hangs in the balance. They preach of a prophecy, ancient and persistent. The prince that was promised will be born to fight the darkness. Azor Ahai will return, reborn from smoke and salt, to wield Lightbringer again and save the world from the long night. When magic runs strong, Red Priests can see visions in flames, not mere fortune-telling, but glimpses of truth across distance and time. They can resurrect the dead through the kiss of life, though this power only works when their god permits it. The returned are never quite the same. Each death they experience before resurrection costs them memories, emotions, pieces of their soul. Beric Dondarrion would learn this truth the hard way, dying and returning 6 times until he barely remembered who he had been. Koth, the great trading city on the southern coast of Essos, houses the warlocks in their ancient palace called the House of the Undying. These sorcerers drink Shade of the Evening, a thick blue liquid made from the leaves of trees that grow only in Koth. The drink turns their lips blue and enhances their ability to see magic, to work illusions, to glimpse possible futures. The Undying Ones themselves are ancient beings kept alive through dark magic, dwelling in the center of a stone labyrinth that exists partially outside normal space. Those who enter see visions of past, present, and multiple possible futures, all layered over each other. Navigating the House of the Undying requires more than walking. It requires understanding that doors might lead to different times, that turning right 3 times might bring you back to where you started, but centuries earlier. After the doom, the warlock's power diminished severely. The Shade of the Evening became less potent. Their illusions grew weaker. The House of the Undying went quiet. For over a century they were reduced to performing parlor tricks in the markets, minor illusions to entertain drunk sailors. They remembered their former glory, but could no longer access it. They needed dragons. Only the return of dragons could restore what they had lost. In the aftermath of the doom, as Valeria's slave pens opened and thousands fled, a new organization was born from suffering. The Faceless Men began not as assassins but as revolutionaries. Slaves from a dozen different cultures worked to death in Valeria's mines, prayed to their various gods for release. One slave began to hear all those prayers and realized something profound. The Dothraki called death the stallion. The Westerosi called it the stranger. The Giscari had their own name, but they were all the same. Death has many faces, but there is only one god of death, the many-faced god. This slave gave the gift of death to those who asked for it. Mercy killings, quick and painless, releasing people from torment. After the doom, the freed slaves fled to Braavos, the secret city founded by escaped Valyrian slaves generations earlier. There, the first Faceless Man established the House of Black and White, a temple to the many-faced god where anyone could come and pray for death, their own death or someone else's. The price varied. Sometimes it was gold, sometimes it was sacrifice, sometimes it was offering your own life in service. The Faceless Men developed a form of magic unique in the known world. They learned to wear the faces of the dead, not masks, not makeup, the actual faces, removed through a sacred process and preserved in the Hall of Faces beneath the temple. An initiate who completed their training could drink from the pool of black and white water in the temple's center and transform. Their bone structure would shift, their height might change slightly, their voice would match. It was partially glamour, partially physical transformation, partially something that defied explanation. The training took years and broke most who attempted it. An acolyte had to become no one, strip away their identity, their personality, their desires. Only when they truly were, no one could they become anyone. Arya Stark would struggle with this teaching, never fully surrendering herself and yet still gaining enough skill to change her face. Jaqen H'ghar demonstrated the ability with casual ease, changing faces 3 times in front of Arya, each transformation complete and perfect. The Faceless Men became the most expensive assassins in the world, but they could not be hired in the conventional sense. One did not simply pay them to kill an enemy. The person requesting death had to make an equivalent sacrifice. The cost scaled with the target. Killing a common merchant might cost gold. Killing a king might cost everything the petitioner owned. And once accepted, a contract could not be refused or abandoned. The many-faced god would have his due. Some historians whisper that the Faceless Men caused the doom itself, that they sabotaged the fire mages maintaining Valyria's volcanic stability, exacting revenge for centuries of slavery. If true, they orchestrated the greatest act of destruction in human history. If false, it's still the kind of reputation that makes people nervous. Across the eastern reaches of Essos, other magical traditions persisted. Yi and the far eastern lands practiced sorceries unknown in the west. So Thorios, the mysterious southern continent, was rumored to house basilisk cults and stranger things. But information from these places rarely reached Westeros, and what did reach it was so distorted by distance and retelling that truth became indistinguishable from fantasy. The key difference between Essos and Westeros was this. In Westeros, magic faded almost entirely after the dragons died. The wall's enchantments persisted because they were woven into the ice itself, but active magic disappeared. In Essos, magic weakened but never fully died. The Shadowbinders still practiced in Eshai, though their shadows were paler. The Red Priests still worshipped at their temples, though their flames showed nothing. The Faceless Men continued their work, and somehow, impossibly, their face-changing magic never stopped working. This suggested something crucial that few understood. Dragons were not the only source of magic. They were amplifiers, making all magic stronger and easier to access. But magic had other wellsprings: blood, death, ancient places where the barrier between worlds wore thin. The Faceless Men drew their power from death itself, which was eternal and unchanging. The Shadowbinders used their own life force. These magics continued even when dragons were extinct, because they were not dependent on dragons. But everything would change when dragons returned. Every practitioner of magic across Essos and Westeros would feel the shift. The glass candles would ignite. The flames would speak again. The shadows would grow darker and more responsive. Magic that had been a whisper would become a shout. And those who had spent generations guarding secrets and practicing weakened arts would suddenly find their power restored to heights not seen since before the Doom. The stage was set. The magical infrastructure of the world remained intact, merely dormant. All it needed was the catalyst. 3 dragon eggs sat in the possession of a young girl who had no idea what she carried. A girl who would walk into fire and emerge as the mother of dragons, the breaker of chains, the herald of magic's return. The long silence was almost over. In the year marked as 1 AC, Aegon Targaryen stood on the shores of Blackwater Bay with his 2 sister wives and 3 dragons. Before him lay a continent divided into 7 kingdoms, ruled by kings who had never faced dragonfire. Behind him lay Dragonstone, the lonely fortress that had been his family's exile for over a century since the Doom. He was not the most powerful lord in Westeros. He commanded no great army. His strength was concentrated in 3 living weapons that made armies irrelevant. Balerion the Black Dread was the largest dragon alive, already ancient, his wingspan vast enough to cast entire towns into shadow. When Balerion flew overhead, people heard his wings beating a mile away. When he opened his jaws, the fire that poured forth melted stone and turned sand to glass. Aegon rode him. Vhagar, ridden by Visenya, was nearly as large, battle-scarred from decades of life, fierce and unpredictable. Miraxes, smallest of the 3 but still massive, carried Rhaenys, 3 dragons, 3 riders, 1 purpose. What drove Aegon to conquer Westeros became the subject of speculation for centuries. Ambition, certainly. The desire to rebuild something approaching Valeria's glory. But there was another reason, one kept secret and passed down only from monarch to heir. Aegon the Conqueror had experienced visions, dragon dreams, the hereditary gift of his bloodline. He saw darkness coming from the north. He saw winter that would not end. He saw death marching on the realms of men. The prophecy he called the Song of Ice and Fire told him that a prince or princess would be needed to unite the realm against this threat. Westeros divided would fall. Westeros united might survive. The conquest was not merely about power. It was about preparing humanity for a war that would not come for 3 centuries, but would be existential when it arrived. The Targaryens sent ravens to every kingdom. then the knee or face dragonfire. Some kingdoms read the message and understood. Others thought 3 dragons could not truly be enough to conquer a continent. Those kingdoms learned their error quickly. The Field of Fire demonstrated what dragons could do to conventional warfare. King Myrndisi of the Reach and King Lorendisi of the Reach and King Lorendisi of the Rock combined their armies, fielding 55,000 men, the largest host assembled in Westeros in living memory. Knights in full armor, pike formations, archers by the thousands, every tactical advantage except one: they faced dragons. Aegon and his sisters attacked from 3 directions simultaneously. The fire that consumed the center of the host burned so hot that armor melted onto the men inside it. Knights died roasting in steel that had been meant to protect them. 4,000 men burned to death in minutes. King Myrn knights died in the flames. King Loren survived only by abandoning his armor and fleeing in a common soldier's clothes. The Reach and the Rock both submitted after that. No one wanted to face Dragonfire again. Harrenhal stood as the largest castle ever built in Westeros. Harren the Black had spent 40 years constructing it, using forced labor and vast wealth. 5 massive towers, walls thick enough to house rooms inside them. Harren boasted that his castle was impregnable, that no army could ever take it. He was technically correct. Armies could not take Harrenhal, but Aegon did not bring an army to Harrenhal. He brought Balerion. The Black Dread flew above the tallest tower and breathed fire down into it. Stone melted like wax. The tower became a furnace. Harren and his sons roasted alive in their own fortress, the castle they thought would protect them becoming their tomb. The towers still stand twisted and ruined, a monument to what Dragonfire can do. No castle in Westeros could withstand dragons. Walls were not protection. They were ovens. 6 of the 7 kingdoms submitted. Only Dorne resisted successfully, not through strength but through strategy. The Dornish refused open battle. They used guerrilla tactics, retreating into deserts where dragons could burn sand but find no targets. When Rhaenys and Meraxes tried to force submission by attacking Dornish strongholds, the Dornish brought them down. A scorpion bolt, a lucky shot, pierced Meraxes through the eye. Dragon and rider fell from the sky together. The Dornish would not join the 7 kingdoms for another 2 centuries, not through conquest but through marriage alliance. Aegon had the swords of his defeated enemies brought to him. 1,000 blades surrendered by lords who bent the knee rather than die. He had them melted with dragonfire and forged into a throne. The Iron Throne was deliberately uncomfortable, jagged with blades, impossible to sit upon without feeling the sharp edges. Aegon supposedly said that kings should never sit easy. Ruling should be a burden felt every moment. The throne's creation took 59 days of dragonfire. Only dragonfire could have forged it, and centuries later, only dragonfire would unmake it. The Targaryen dynasty brought unity to Westeros but could not stop magic's gradual decline. 3 dragons remained alive when dozens had once filled Valyrian skies. Their presence kept a baseline of magical energy in the world. Glass candles did not light, but they did not crumble to dust either. Wildfire remained possible to create. Though difficult, the wall's enchantments held strong, but active magic grew increasingly rare. In the north, skin changing appeared less frequently with each generation. Once, every other Stark might have the gift. Now it might skip 3 or 4 generations. Grenseers became legendary rather than occasional. The old gods' worship shrank to the north alone as the faith of the 7 dominated the south. Weirwood trees continued to be cut down. The network of watching faces grew more sparse. The citadel at Old Town rose in influence during this period. Sisters, scholars who wore chains representing their fields of study, advised every lord in Westeros. They valued knowledge, reason, and what could be proven. Magic was none of those things. Many maesters viewed magic as superstition, as trickery, as the enemy of progress and enlightenment. A few went further. Archmaester Marwyn would later confirm what some suspected. The Citadel had worked actively to eliminate magic from the world. They saw magic as dangerous, unpredictable, antithetical to the rational society they wanted to build. Whether through deliberate action or simply through the changing times, magic faded. The Targaryens held the throne for 283 years. Their dragons kept a spark of magic alive, but the dragons themselves were dying, and when the dragons died, that spark would finally extinguish completely. The Night's Watch continued their vigil on the wall, but their purpose was increasingly forgotten. Once they were the shield against the darkness, the Watchers who held back horrors from beyond the world. Now they became a dumping ground for criminals and unwanted sons. The vows remained the same, but the understanding behind them eroded. Few believed the White Walkers had ever existed. The wall was just a wall. The watch was just a punishment. Magic persisted in small ways. Unnoticed by most, Valyrian steel swords remained impossibly sharp. The wall never melted, even in the hottest summer. Dreams occasionally carried truth, but these were dismissed as coincidence, as natural phenomena misunderstood, as legends exaggerated. The world was becoming mundane. And then came the Dance of Dragons, the civil war that would kill magic entirely for a century and a half. King Viserys C. Targaryen made a decision that would destroy his family and kill magic itself. He named his daughter Rhaenyra as heir to the Iron Throne, setting aside centuries of tradition that favored male succession. When he died in 129 AC, the realm split. Half supported Rhaenyra's claim based on her father's wishes. Half supported her younger half-brother Aegon II based on tradition and the simple fact that he was male. The dispute would be settled not through negotiation but through dragonfire. Both sides had dragons. This was unprecedented. Every previous Targaryen conflict had been one-sided, with dragons facing armies. Now dragons would face dragons. The creatures that had conquered Westeros would tear each other apart in the skies, while the realm burned below. The Dance of Dragons earned its name from the aerial battles that defied everything humans thought they understood about warfare. Dragons fighting dragons created spectacles of terrible beauty. The fire met fire. Claws tore through scales that steel could not scratch. Wings tangled and both beasts plummeted from the sky, locked in death spirals. The roars could be heard for miles. The blood that fell from above was hot enough to scorch what it touched. At Rook's Rest, Meleys the Red Queen fought Vhagar and Sunfire simultaneously. The battle raged through the clouds while armies watched from below, unable to do anything but witness. Meleys killed King Aegon's dragon Sunfire, but Vhagar, the last surviving dragon from Aegon the Conqueror's original three, brought Meleys down. Princess Rhaenys died with her dragon, the first of many dragon riders to fall. Above Harrenhal, Daemon Targaryen on Caraxes confronted Prince Aemond on Vhagar. The two largest dragons remaining in the world collided above the God's Eye, a deep lake in the Riverlands. They locked together and fell, tearing at each other even as they plunged toward the water. Caraxes managed to rip Vhagar's throat open. Vhagar's claws tore through Caraxes' belly. Both dragons crashed into the lake and sank. Both riders died. The mutual destruction eliminated two of the most powerful beasts alive. At Tumbleton, 3 dragons died in a single chaotic battle. Seasmoke, Vermithor, and Tessarion fought through streets filled with soldiers and civilians. Buildings collapsed. Fires spread uncontrolled. By the time the fighting ended, all 3 dragons were dead, and Tumbleton was ash. But the most significant slaughter of dragons happened not in battle, but in a riot. The small folk of King's Landing had endured months of war, watching dragons burn innocent people, watching nobles play their games while common people starved. A street preacher called the Shepherd began gathering crowds, preaching that dragons were demons, abominations against the gods. His words found fertile ground in a population that had learned to fear and hate the very creatures that symbolized Targaryen power. The mob stormed the Dragon Pit, a massive domed arena where the Targaryens kept their dragons in the capital. Thousands of people armed with crude weapons, torches, and righteous fury attacked dragons. The beasts killed hundreds with fire and claw. Dreamfire, Shriekos, Morgul, and Tyraxes all died that night. But dragons died as well, brought down not by other dragons, not by armies, but by a mob of people who decided that enough was enough. The dragons were mortal, after all. They could be killed. And with that realization, something fundamental changed in how humanity viewed them. Princess Rhaenyra herself was fed to a dragon on the orders of King Aegon II. Sunfire, despite being crippled from earlier battles, consumed the woman who had fought a war to claim her birthright. The image of a queen being eaten by a dragon, while her son watched, became the embodiment of how completely the dance had corrupted everything the Targaryens stood for. Eventually, King Aegon II was poisoned by his own men, desperate to end a war that was consuming the realm. Rhaenyra's son became King Aegon III at 10 years old, having watched his mother die. The trauma broke something in him. He became known as Aegon the Dragonbane, though he never killed a dragon himself. He simply hated them. And during his reign, the last dragons died. Only 4 dragons survived the dance. Morning, a hatchling too young to fight, never grew to full size and died young without producing eggs. Silverwing, once ridden by good Queen Alysanne, refused all riders afterward and eventually died wild. Sheepstealer disappeared into the Vale Mountains, possibly surviving decades longer, but never seen again. The Cannibal, a wild dragon that had lived on Dragonstone, eating dragon eggs and hatchlings, vanished completely. Whether it died or flew far away to some unknown land, no one knows. Throughout Aegon III's reign, attempts were made to hatch dragon eggs. All failed. The eggs turned to stone, or simply refused to quicken. The last dragon, a small deformed creature born in 153 AC, lived only briefly. It was sickly from birth, wingless, malformed. When it died, magic died with it. The effect was immediate and total. At the Citadel in Old Town, Maesters recorded the exact moment. The glass candles that had remained dark but intact suddenly became nothing more than carved obsidian. The potential for them to light again disappeared. In Karth, the House of the Undying went completely silent. The Undying Ones fell into a sleep so deep they seemed dead. In Ashai, Shadowbinders found their rituals required 10 times the effort for a tenth of the effect. Red priests across Essos watched their sacred flames show nothing but mundane fire. No visions, no prophecy, just heat and light. In Westeros, the collapse was even more pronounced. Warging, already rare, became nearly extinct. Perhaps one person in a generation might have wolf dreams they could not explain. Greenseers disappeared entirely. The weirwood trees still stood, but no one could see through them. The Night's Watch continued guarding the wall, but their purpose became purely theoretical. The wildlings beyond the wall were just humans trying to survive in a harsh climate. There were no White Walkers. There had never been White Walkers, just stories. The Maesters of the Citadel, particularly those who had worked to diminish magic's influence, saw this as vindication. The Age of Reason had arrived. Superstition could be replaced with knowledge. Magic was a crutch that humanity no longer needed. They began rewriting histories, explaining away magical events as exaggerations or misunderstandings. The children of the forest became primitive humans, misremembered as a different species. The White Walkers became wildling legends mixed with harsh winter storms. Dragons were real, but their abilities had been exaggerated. Anything supernatural was reinterpreted as natural. For 150 years, Westeros existed without active magic. The wall remained, huge and undeniable, but its enchantments were dormant. The dead did not try to pass, so no one noticed the wards were still functioning. Valyrian steel swords remained impossibly sharp, but this was attributed to lost metallurgy rather than magic. Everything inexplicable was explained away or forgotten. The world became smaller, more predictable, safer in some ways, but also diminished. The sense of wonder that came from knowing magic was real, that the world held mysteries beyond human understanding, faded into cynicism, children's stories, fairy tales, nothing more. House Targaryen continued ruling from the Iron Throne, but without dragons, they were just another dynasty, special bloodline, certainly, royal by right of conquest, but not fundamentally different from any other noble house. The incest that had been justified as necessary to preserve dragon-bonding magic now seemed merely degenerate. The occasional madness that ran through the bloodline could no longer be explained as a side effect of containing magical power. They were just mad sometimes. Robert's rebellion in 283 AC overthrew the last Targaryen king. Aerys II, called the Mad King, was killed by Jaime Lannister. Prince Rhaegar fell to Robert's warhammer at the Trident. The last Targaryen children, Viserys and Daenerys, fled across the narrow sea to Essos. The Dragon Dynasty ended not with fire and glory, but with exile and defeat. 3 dragon eggs, petrified and apparently dead, traveled with Daenerys as part of her meager possessions. Wedding gifts from Magister Illyrio of Pentos, beautiful but useless. Decorative reminders of a dead age. No one, least of all Daenerys herself, imagined they could ever hatch. Magic seemed gone forever. The world had moved past it, entered a new era where steel and politics mattered more than spells and prophecies. But magic is not a force that can be permanently suppressed. It is woven into the fabric of the world itself, and like a tide, it follows cycles. It retreats, but it always returns. The absence just makes the return more dramatic when it finally comes. In the frozen lands beyond the wall, beyond where any living human had ventured in centuries, something stirred. Blue eyes opened in the darkness. Not human eyes, not anymore. The White Walkers were waking from their 8,000-year slumber, and they were waking hungry. The century and a half following the last dragon's death in 153 AC became the age when humanity forgot how to believe in anything it could not touch. Magic became mythology. Mythology became fairy tales, and fairy tales were dismissed as entertainment for children who did not yet know better. The Maesters led this transformation with methodical precision. At the Citadel, histories were rewritten to strip away the supernatural. Dragons had been real, yes, but their abilities were surely exaggerated by primitive observers who lacked proper understanding of natural phenomena. The children of the forest were simply small humans, perhaps suffering from malnutrition, whose shamanic practices looked like magic to the superstitious. White Walkers were the result of harsh winters combined with wildling folklore and the human tendency to create monsters from shadows. Every unexplained event received a rational explanation, whether it truly fit or not. The important thing was providing an alternative to magic. Young Maesters were taught to view the old stories with bemused tolerance, the way an adult might smile at a child's insistence that monsters hide under the bed. There were no monsters, there never had been, just misunderstanding and exaggeration compounding across generations. This worldview spread from the Citadel to every castle in Westeros. Lords who employed Maesters absorbed their skepticism. The faith of the Seven, already predisposed toward viewing magic as ungodly, embraced the new rationalism. Even the miracles in their own holy texts became metaphors rather than literal truth. The smith did not actually forge the stars. The warrior did not literally battle demons. These were symbolic teachings, not historical facts. Yet magic had not completely disappeared. It had merely become so faint, so rare, that it could be explained away or ignored by those determined not to see it. The wall still stood, 700 feet of ice that never fully melted, even in the hottest summers. Maesters attributed this to the wall's thickness and the perpetual cold beyond it. They did not consider that enchantments woven into the ice itself might be responsible. No one tested whether the dead could pass through because no one believed animated corpses existed to test with. In Winterfell, the ancient seat of House Stark, hot springs continued flowing beneath the castle exactly as they had for thousands of years. The water's temperature never varied. The flow never stopped. Natural geothermal activity, the Meisters declared, though they could not quite explain why it was so reliable or why similar springs did not exist throughout the north. The Stark children occasionally reported strange dreams, seeing through the eyes of wolves, running through forests on 4 legs, hunting with senses sharper than human perception allowed. These were dismissed as vivid nightmares brought on by the stress of youth. Perhaps too much spiced wine at dinner, certainly not actual skin changing. That was impossible. The adults who had experienced similar dreams in their own youth learned to keep quiet about them, learned that speaking of such things brought concerned looks and whispered worries about madness. Weirwood trees still grew in God's woods throughout the north, their carved faces watching with hollow eyes, but no one looked back through them. The trees were just trees, the faces were artistic tradition, nothing more. Beyond the wall, the wildlings told stories that the Night's Watch dismissed with increasing confidence, tales of cold shadows moving through the trees, of corpses that would not stay dead, of nights when the darkness felt alive and hungry. Superstitious nonsense, said the crows of the watch. The wildlings were barely civilized, prone to seeing threats in every shadow. There were no monsters beyond the wall, just harsh weather and desperate people. The Night's Watch itself had transformed from a sacred order into a penal institution. Once men took the black as an honor, choosing to defend humanity against existential darkness. Now criminals chose the wall over execution. Rapers, thieves, poachers, anyone facing death could take the black and live out their days in frozen misery. The vows remained the same, the words unchanged, but the meaning had drained away like water from a cracked cup. In Essos, magic persisted more visibly, but no less diminished. Red priests maintained their temples, preaching of Ruhr and the eternal battle between light and darkness. But their fires showed them nothing except dancing flames. Their prophecies came from interpretation of mundane signs rather than true visions. Thoros of Maya, a red priest who came to Westeros during Robert's rebellion, became a notorious drunk. His flaming sword was a clever trick with wildfire, not actual magic. He performed the rites because they were his duty, but he had long since stopped believing they meant anything. The warlocks of Qarth survived as entertainers and confidence artists. Minor illusions, sleight of hand, psychological manipulation. They knew the old magic had existed. Their libraries contained detailed accounts of what the House of the Undying had shown when it functioned properly. But theory without practice is just history. They were scholars of a dead art. The Faceless Men continued their work in Braavos, and this presented a puzzle that no maester could adequately explain. The Faces' changing abilities should not have worked with magic dead, yet somehow they did. Assassins still transformed perfectly, wearing the faces of the dead so convincingly that even close family could be deceived. When pressed, maesters suggested elaborate makeup and prosthetics, perhaps combined with acting ability. Those who had witnessed the transformations knew better, but learned that insisting on magic only made them look foolish. Perhaps the many-faced god, being death itself, drew power from a source that never diminished. Death was the only constant. Empires rose and fell. Dragons lived and died. Magic waxed and waned. But death continued without pause. The faceless men served something eternal, and perhaps that connection sustained them when all other magic failed. Throughout this era of skepticism, strange events still occurred, but were reinterpreted through the lens of disbelief. In 259 AC, King Aegon Viri Targaryen died at Summerhall attempting to hatch dragon eggs through some ritual involving wildfire and possibly blood sacrifice. The tragedy of Summerhall killed the king, his son Prince Duncan, and Lord Commander Duncan, the Tall of the King's Guard. The fire consumed the castle, but no dragons hatched. The Meisters declared this proved magic was dead. If it had ever existed, surely it would have worked for a king desperately trying to restore it. The fact that the ritual failed meant magic was gone forever. No one considered that perhaps the ritual failed because magic was too weak, not because it was non-existent. That given sufficient power, the eggs might have quickened, that the timing was wrong rather than the method. Failure was taken as proof of impossibility. Robert's rebellion in 283 AC represented pure human conflict, decided entirely by steel and strategy. Robert Baratheon's warhammer killed Prince Rhaegar Targaryen at the Trident. Jaime Lannister's sword killed King Aerys II in the throne room. Tywin Lannister's treachery delivered King's Landing. Dragons played no part because there were no dragons. Magic offered no advantage because there was no magic. The rebellion was won and lost based purely on which side fought better and chose allies more wisely. The Targaryen dynasty ended not with supernatural catastrophe, but with political miscalculation and military defeat. The last dragon lords became refugees. Viserys and Daenerys fled to Essos with only loyal protectors and 3 petrified dragon eggs. The eggs were beautiful, certainly, valuable as historical artifacts, but they were stone. They would always be stone. Dragons were extinct. Magic was dead. These were simply facts, as obvious as the sunset and as unchangeable as the tide. Except tides do change. They retreat only to return, and sometimes what appears to be solid stone is actually a crisis waiting for the right conditions to crack open. In 297 AC, a decade and a half after Robert's rebellion, Ned Stark executed a deserter from the Night's Watch who babbled about White Walkers. The man was clearly mad. There were no White Walkers. Ned performed the execution himself, as was proper. On the way back to Winterfell, they found a dead direwolf south of the Wall, the first direwolf spotted south of the Wall in over 200 years. The wolf had died giving birth to 6 pups, one for each of Ned's legitimate children. Jon Snow found a 6th, an albino runt away from the others. Ghost, 7 direwolves, 6 bright-eyed and 1 pale, returned to the world after centuries of absence. Ned allowed his children to keep them as pets, because they were just large wolves, nothing magical about them, simply a rare species that had wandered south for unknown reasons. The Stark children began having dreams that night. Dreams where they ran on 4 legs, where they hunted with teeth and claw, where they saw the world through eyes that were not their own. They were just dreams. Strange dreams, certainly. Vivid dreams, but dreams nonetheless. Nothing to worry about. In Essos, a young woman named Daenerys Targaryen was sold to Khal Drogo of the Dothraki. Among her wedding gifts were 3 petrified dragon eggs. She found herself able to hold them in fire without burning. She placed them in hot coals, and they were pleasantly warm rather than scalding. This should have been impossible, but she told no one. Learned to hide the strangeness. After all, everyone knew magic was dead. Beyond the Wall, the Night's Watch ranging parties began disappearing. Experienced rangers who knew the haunted forest vanished without trace. The bodies that were found came back wrong, cold to the touch even hours after death. Eyes that should have been glazed with death instead holding a pale blue light. Brothers of the Watch killed these corpses again, burning them quickly, speaking of it to no one outside their order. Because if they spoke of dead men walking, they would be dismissed as mad. All across the world, in ways large and small, magic was stirring from its long sleep. But humanity had spent 150 years learning not to see it, learning that the rational explanation was always correct, learning that those who claimed otherwise were fools or charlatans. The embers were beginning to glow, smoke rising from ashes, long thought cold, but no one wanted to believe the fire was returning. Fire was dangerous. Fire was unpredictable. Better to remain in the safe, explainable darkness than admit that light was coming back. The world was about to change. 3 eggs were about to hatch, and everything humanity thought it knew about the nature of reality was about to burn. In 298 AC, magic returned to the world not gradually, but in a single catastrophic moment. The shift was so sudden, so complete, that those sensitive to such things felt it like a physical blow. But the catalyst was not some cosmic alignment or prophesied event. It was a teenage girl walking into fire. The Stark children were first to experience magic's awakening, though they did not understand what was happening to them. Bran Stark climbed a tower in Winterfell and saw something he should not have seen. Jaime Lannister pushed him from the window. The fall should have killed him. Instead, Bran fell into a coma that lasted weeks. During that time, his consciousness fled into summer. His direwolf, he ran through the Godswood on 4 legs. He hunted. He experienced the world through senses sharper than human. When he woke, the connection remained. He could feel summer's presence, sense his emotions, occasionally slip into his skin while sleeping. The first true skin changer in over a century had emerged, and he was only 10 years old. Robb Stark rode to war after his father's execution, commanding northern armies against the Lannisters. He never lost a battle. His tactical instincts seemed supernatural. He found hidden paths through mountains. He anticipated enemy movements before scouts reported them. His bannerman whispered that he had wolf's blood, meant as metaphor. The truth was more literal. Grey Wind ranged ahead of the army, and through their bond, Robb saw what his direwolf saw. He scouted enemy positions through Grey Wind's eyes, planned attacks based on information no human spy could have gathered. He was skin-changing without understanding. He was doing it. Arya Stark fled King's Landing after her father's death, eventually traveling with a group heading north. She dreamed of Nymeria every night. The dire wolf she had been forced to drive away had survived, grown huge, and now led a pack of hundreds of wolves through the Riverlands. Through Nymeria's eyes, Arya saw things happening far from her body. She watched the wolf drag corpses from rivers, witnessed battles from a distance. The dreams were too vivid to be simple imagination, but she was a child on the run. She had no one to explain what was happening to her. Jon Snow took the black and went to the wall. Ghost followed him everywhere, silent and watchful. The albino direwolf seemed to sense danger before it appeared, woke Jon from sleep when threats approached, found hidden enemies in the darkness beyond the wall. Their bond grew stronger daily. Jon began finishing Ghost's kills in dreams, tasting blood that was not his own, feeling satisfaction at the hunt. Rickon was youngest, and his bond with Shaggy Dog was wildest. Boy and Wolf seemed to share temperament. When Rickon grew angry, Shaggy Dog became aggressive. When the wolf felt threatened, Rickon would lash out. They fed each other's emotions, amplifying fear and rage until both became nearly feral. Rickon had prophetic nightmares that he could not articulate, dreams of his father's death before anyone brought word south. Shaggy Dog howled the night. Ned Stark was executed, though they were hundreds of miles apart. The Stark children's awakening gifts represented the return of old northern magic. But something far more dramatic was unfolding in Essos. Daenerys Targaryen had lost everything. Her brutal brother Viserys was killed by Khal Drogo, molten gold poured over his head. Drogo himself fell to infection from a minor wound, dying by inches despite being the greatest warrior of the Dothraki. A Magi named Mirri Maz Durbar promised to save him through blood magic. She performed a ritual using a stallion's life, channeling its strength into Drogo, but blood magic always demands more than offered. Drogo survived, but his mind was gone. An empty shell, breathing but not alive. And Daenerys' unborn son died in the womb, born twisted and scaled with tiny wings that would never fly. Mirri Maz Durbar explained the price. Only death can pay for life. Daenerys had wanted life. Death was what she received. The Magi had taken revenge for her people by destroying everything. Daenerys loved. The Khalasar abandoned her. She was alone in a foreign land with no power, no protection, no hope. She built a funeral pyre for Drogo, placed his body on stacked wood, along with treasures and weapons for his journey to the Nightlands. Then she added something else. 3 dragon eggs that had been her wedding gifts. Stone eggs, dead eggs, beautiful but worthless. And she added Mirri Maz Durbar, bound and conscious, payment for the lives the Magi had stolen. Everyone watched as Daenerys lit the pyre. The flames rose high, fed by oil and dried wood. Mirri Maz Durbar screamed as she burned. The heat became intense enough that the Dothraki backed away, and then Daenerys walked into the fire. Ser Jorah Mormont lunged forward to stop her, but the heat drove him back. Everyone assumed she was committing suicide, grief-driven to madness. They waited for her screams. Instead they heard cracking, not wood popping in flame. Something else, something deeper. The eggs were hatching. The fire burned through the night. When dawn came and the flames died, Daenerys sat in the ashes completely unharmed. Her clothes had burned away, but her skin was unmarked, and curled around her, nursing at her breast, were 3 dragon hatchlings, black and red, green and bronze, cream and gold. They were tiny, no larger than cats, but they were dragons, living, breathing dragons. The firstborn in over 150 years. At the exact moment those eggs cracked, magic returned to the world. In Old Town at the Citadel, Archmaester Marwyn was in his chambers when the glass candle on his desk burst into flame. Not metaphorical flame, actual fire, multicolored and bright, burning without fuel. He had studied that candle for decades. It had been cold obsidian, interesting only as a historical artifact. Now it burned as the old text said it should. He stood staring at it for a long moment, then spoke a single sentence: "The dragons are returned." In Karth, thousands of miles from the Dothraki Sea, the warlocks woke screaming. Their shade of the evening, which had been weak and barely effective, suddenly became potent beyond measure. The House of the Undying, silent for over a century, roared back to life. The Undying Ones stirred from their death sleep. They could sense the dragons. They craved them, needed them. The warlocks' lips turned blue from drinking the suddenly powerful shade. Their magic, reduced to parlor tricks, became genuine sorcery overnight. Across Essos, in every temple of Rosia, the sacred flames began showing visions again. Red priests who had performed rituals by rote for years suddenly saw the fires speak to them. Prophecies poured forth, images of wars to come, of darkness rising, of a girl with 3 dragons who would change everything. The flames showed Stannis Baratheon at Dragonstone and whispered that he was important, showed Jon Snow at the Wall and named him significant. The future was alive with possibility again. Melisandre, serving Stannis Baratheon at Dragonstone, felt her power surge. She had been strong before, sustained by training and discipline and the ruby at her throat. Now she became something more. Her shadow magic, which had worked but cost her dearly, became easier. Her visions in the flames grew clearer. She could see across vast distances, could glimpse threads of fate weaving together. The return of dragons had returned her full strength. In King's Landing, the Alchemists' Guild discovered that their wildfire had become far more potent and easier to produce. For years they had struggled to create the substance in meaningful quantities. Suddenly, their stores were overflowing. The spells that had barely functioned now worked perfectly. They did not understand why. They simply knew that something fundamental had changed. At the wall, the ancient enchantments woven into the ice began glowing faintly on the northern face. No one noticed because no one was looking, but the wards that prevented the dead from passing south had reactivated fully. The White Walkers, who had been slowly pushing south as magic weakened, suddenly found their path blocked by barriers far stronger than before. Beyond the wall, the White Walkers felt the shift and understood what it meant. Magic had returned. Their ancient enemy was awake again. They had been moving slowly, carefully, building their army in the darkness. Now they would need to move faster. The living had dragons again. The balance had shifted. The war was no longer hypothetical. It was inevitable, and approaching rapidly. The children of the forest, hidden in caves far beyond where any human ventured, felt the change and wept, some with joy, some with sorrow. Magic's return meant hope. It also meant the long night was coming again. The cycle was repeating, and this time there were so few of them left to fight. Bran Stark began having dreams of a three-eyed raven. It spoke to him in visions, told him to come north, promised to teach him to fly. He did not understand. He was a cripple, dragged around in a basket or carried by Hodor, but the dreams persisted. The raven was waiting, and somehow Bran knew he needed to find it. Daenerys named her dragons after the men she had lost, Drogon for Drogo, Rhaegal for her brother Rhaegar, whom she had never met, Viserion for Viserys. Despite everything he had done, the dragons grew rapidly, far faster than natural animals. Within weeks, they were the size of small dogs. Within months, large enough to ride on her shoulders. Within a year, they would be able to carry a sheep. Magic nourished them. They did not just eat meat. They consumed the ambient magical energy that their very existence created. A feedback loop. The dragons made magic stronger. Stronger magic made the dragons grow faster. Everywhere they went, people stopped and stared. Dragons were myth. Dragons were extinct. Dragons were impossible. Yet here they were, undeniable, breathing fire and screeching their hunger. Daenerys became the mother of dragons, a title that carried weight across the known world. She had nothing else. No army, no gold, no power, but she had 3 dragons, and that changed everything. The Dothraki, who had abandoned her, came crawling back. Seeing her emerge from fire unburned, holding living dragons, they declared her the stallion who mounts the world. She began gathering followers, not because of her name or her claim to some distant throne, because she had done the impossible, because magic followed her, because dragons obeyed her command. The world had spent 150 years growing comfortable with a mundane existence, comfortable with knowing that the supernatural was safely in the past. That comfort shattered the night 3 eggs hatched. Magic was back, and it was hungry for all the time it had lost. The 3-eyed raven came to Bran in dreams. Always when he fell asleep as summer, he would be running through the forest on 4 legs, feeling the wind in his fur, and then suddenly he would be flying, soaring above the trees, seeing the world spread below him like a map. The raven flew beside him, or he was the raven, or both at once. It was confusing and exhilarating and terrifying. The raven spoke with a voice that was not quite sound, more like thoughts that were not his own appearing in his mind. You will never walk again, but you will fly. Come north. I am waiting. I have been watching you. All of you. your whole lives. After Theon Greyjoy betrayed the Starks and took Winterfell, after Bran and Rickon fled into the crypts and then beyond, the dreams became more insistent. Bran was crippled, dragged in a basket, or carried by Hodor, the gentle giant who could say only his own name. Meera and Jojen Reed had joined them, children of Howland Reed, who had fought beside Ned Stark at the Tower of Joy. Jojen had the green sight, could see fragments of future and past in dreams. He had seen the three-eyed raven too. He knew they needed to go north, beyond the wall, though he also knew he would die there. Rickon and Osha split off, heading toward the Umbers. Bran's group went north, guided by dreams and visions, and Jojen's certainty that this was necessary. They passed through devastated villages, through the Night Fort with its dark legends, through the Black Gate that opened only to a brother of the Night's Watch. Sam Tarly helped them, gave them dragon-glass weapons, told them of the White Walkers he had killed with obsidian. Then they passed beyond the wall into lands where no law ruled except survival. A figure met them in the wilderness beyond, dressed in black, face hidden, riding an elk and commanding ravens. He called himself Cold Hands, clearly dead, body cold and preserved, but not a mindless wight. He had intelligence, purpose, and a strange honor. Some whispered he might be Benjen Stark, Bran's uncle who had disappeared ranging years ago. He never confirmed or denied it, simply guided them deeper into the haunted forest, protecting them from wights, leading them toward a destination only he knew. The journey took weeks. They fought off wights multiple times, creatures that should not exist according to everything the Maesters taught. Corpses with blue glowing eyes, bodies that did not decay, attacking with mindless hunger. Only fire truly stopped them. Dragonglass could shatter them, but fire was safest, and fire was hard to maintain in the frozen lands beyond the wall. The cave they finally reached was hidden in a hill, surrounded by weirwood trees whose roots formed a natural maze. Inside, the roots grew thicker, weaving through rock, creating chambers and passages. Carved faces watched from the walls. The entire structure seemed alive, or at least aware. The children of the forest were there. Leaf and others, small beings with large eyes and delicate features, exactly as the legends described. They were real. They had been real all along. Humanity had convinced itself they were myth, but here they stood, speaking the old tongue, using magic that made fire bloom from their hands without fuel or incantation. And at the heart of the cave, fused into the roots of an enormous weirwood tree, was the three-eyed raven himself. Not actually a bird. A man, an ancient man whose body had merged with the tree, roots growing through him, holding him suspended. His skin was pale as bone. One eye was missing. A red birthmark covered part of his face in the shape of a raven. Bran knew him from stories. Brangden Rivers, Bloodraven, a Targaryen bastard who had lived over a century ago. Bloodraven had been a king's bastard, legitimized, powerful. He served as Hand of the King during tumultuous times, fought in the Blackfire rebellions, was feared and hated in equal measure for his use of spies and his rumored sorcery. Eventually sent to the wall as punishment for murdering a rival under a peace banner, became Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, ranged beyond the wall and never returned. That was in 233 AC, over 70 years ago. He should have been long dead. Instead, he sat in the tree, kept alive by magic and purpose. He had been the three-eyed raven, the last greenseer, for decades, watching the world through the weirwoods, seeing everything that happened near a heart tree, waiting for someone to pass his knowledge to, waiting for Bran. The training began immediately. Bran learned to open his third eye, to see through the weirwood network. It was like green seeing through summer, but infinitely more complex. He could look through any weirwood tree, anywhere, could watch events from the present. Even more impossibly, He could look backward through time, witnessing the past as clearly as if he stood there. "The past is already written," Bloodraven told him. "The ink is dry. You cannot change what has happened. You can only understand it." Bran watched the history of Westeros unfold. He saw the first men crossing into Westeros, watched the war between men and the children, witnessed the pact being signed at the Isle of Faces, saw Brandon the Builder raising Winterfell's storm's end, the wall itself. Centuries flowed past him like water. He saw more recent events too, watched his father as a young man, saw Ned Stark at the Tower of Joy, fighting to reach his sister, Lyanna lying in a bed of blood, dying from childbirth, whispering desperately, "Promise me, Ned, promise me," and Ned taking a baby, his nephew, and claiming him as his bastard son to protect him. Jon Snow was not Ned Stark's bastard. He was the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. His true name was Aegon Targaryen, and he had the best claim to the Iron Throne of anyone alive. This revelation shook Bran, but he had no way to communicate it to Jon. He was thousands of miles away, learning to be something other than human. The visions showed him darker truths as well. He watched the children of the forest create the first White Walker, saw them capture a man during their war against the first men, bound him to a weirwood tree, drove dragon glass into his heart, watched his eyes turn from brown to ice blue as the Night King was born. The children had created the very thing that would nearly destroy all life, a weapon that escaped their control. He saw the Mad King, Aerys Targaryen, descending into madness, heard him screaming, "Burn them all, over and over, burn them all." Some of that madness came from Grainseer visions he could not process, the future bleeding into the past, destroying his mind. Then came the most painful vision, the origin of Hodor. Bran watched young Wylis working at Winterfell decades ago, a stable boy, simple but functional, able to speak normally. Then Bran's consciousness in the present slipped. He was being pursued by whites outside the cave. Mera was screaming at Hodor to hold the door, and Bran was inside Hodor, controlling him in the present, while simultaneously watching Wylis in the past through the weirwood. The two timelines intersected. Present Hodor heard Mera's command through Bran's consciousness. Past Wylis somehow heard it too, felt it, experienced his own future death in a single terrible moment. His mind broke trying to process it. Hold the door, hold the door, hold the door, hold the door, hold the door. The word became his name, his identity, his entire existence. Bran had destroyed Hodor's mind decades before they met, created the gentle giant's condition through time, paradox. And in the present, Hodor held the door. Whites tore at him, ripping flesh, but he held the door so Bran and Mera could escape. He died exactly as he had seen himself die decades ago. The most tragic sacrifice, dying to fulfill a loop that had defined his entire life. The Night King found them because Bran made a mistake. He green-sought while not properly supervised, ranging too far in his visions. He witnessed the White Walkers marching south, saw their army, saw the Night King standing among them, and the Night King saw him back, reached across the vision, and grabbed Bran's arm, left a mark, glowing ice blue. "He touched you," Bloodraven said, voice filled with horror. "He knows you're here." The mark broke the protective wards the children had woven around the cave, wards that had stood for thousands of years, shattered because the Night King had touched Bran. The attack came swiftly. White Walkers and whites swarmed the cave. The children of the forest fought desperately, hurling fire magic, using dragon glass weapons. Leaf sacrificed herself in a massive explosion that took dozens of whites with her. Summer died defending Bran, torn apart by dead hands. Part of Bran died with his direwolf. the bond severing like a limb being amputated. Bloodraven transferred his power in the final moments, made Bran the new three-eyed raven, all the knowledge, all the sight, all the weight of being the world's memory passed to a teenage boy. Then the Night King entered the cave and shattered Bloodraven with an ice blade. The ancient Greyseer exploded into splinters of frozen wood and ancient flesh. Mira dragged Bran from the cave. Cold hands bought them time, fighting a rear-guard action. They escaped into the wilderness. Benjen Stark, revealed at last, saved them. He was dead but preserved by the children's magic before he could become a white. Trapped between life and death, he got them to the wall, then turned back. The dead could not pass the wall's ancient barrier. Bran returned to Winterfell, fundamentally changed. He was no longer Brandon Stark. The memories of being Bran remained, but they felt distant, like a story someone else had told him. He was the three-eyed raven now. He could see through any weirwood, past and present, could witness almost everything that had ever happened in Westeros, could walk into animals or even humans. Though he tried not to do that, it felt wrong, violating. His siblings were disturbed by what he had become. He knew things he should not know, spoke with detachment about terrible events, showed no emotion when discussing deaths or tragedies. He was a living archive of history, all knowledge and no feeling. But that knowledge would prove essential. He knew Jon's true parentage, and could prove it. He knew Littlefinger had betrayed Ned Stark, had orchestrated so much of the chaos that had consumed Westeros. He could track the Night King's movements through visions, could see the army of the dead approaching, could prepare Winterfell for the battle to come. Most importantly, he understood what the Night King wanted, not simply to kill everyone. That was too simple. The Night King wanted to erase the three-eyed raven, to destroy all memory. If there was no memory, there was no history. If there was no history, humanity lost its identity, its continuity. The Night King wanted an endless night, not just of darkness but of forgetting. A world where the dead existed in eternal present with no past and no future. Bran was the opposite of that. He was memory incarnate, the living repository of everything that had ever been, and the Night King would come for him, would try to kill him, which meant Bran could be used as bait, could draw the Night King into a trap, could end the war against the dead, not through armies, but through a single perfect strike. He sat in the Godswood at Winterfell as the dead approached, knowing he might die, knowing his visions showed multiple possible futures, but not which one would come to pass. He was the bait, the target, the reason the Night King would expose himself, and in that exposure lay the only chance for victory. Magic had transformed Bran Stark from a boy who loved to climb into something far older and stranger. He had paid for that transformation with his legs, with his direwolf, with his humanity itself. But he had gained something in return, the ability to ensure that no matter what happened, no matter who lived or died, the truth would survive. Memory would persist. The three-eyed raven would continue, one way or another. He was no longer Bran, but perhaps that was acceptable. Perhaps that was necessary. The world needed the three-eyed raven more than it needed Brandon Stark. And so Brandon Stark had ceased to exist, replaced by something both less and infinitely more. The army of the dead arrived at Winterfell on a night so cold that breath froze before it could be exhaled. Over 100,000 whites marched in perfect silence, their blue eyes glowing in the darkness. White Walker commanders rode dead horses at the flanks, and above them all, the Night King rode Viserion, the dragon Daenerys had lost beyond the wall, now a creature of ice and death-breathing blue flame that burned cold instead of hot. Every living soul capable of holding a weapon had gathered at Winterfell, Northmen and wildlings, knights from the Vale, unsullied from across the narrow sea, Dothraki screamers on their horses, 2 living dragons and their riders, red priestess and fire magic. Valyrian steel swords pulled from ancient armories, dragon glass weapons forged by the thousands. And at the center of it all, Bran Stark sat in the Godswood, bait for a trap that might not work. Melisandre arrived at dawn, walking through the snow. She had been exiled after burning Shireen Baratheon alive, but she returned because her visions showed this was where she would die. She touched her hands to the Dothraki Arax and spoke in High Valyrian. The blades burst into flame, thousands of them simultaneously. The horde of horsemen charged into the darkness, fire streaming behind them. It lasted perhaps 3 minutes. One by one, the flames went out as their wielders died. The finest light cavalry in the world was slaughtered almost instantly. Melisandre struggled to light the defensive trenches. Her magic, so powerful in small applications, faltered when trying to create fire on such scale. Finally, she succeeded, igniting a ring of flame around Winterfell's walls, but fire only delayed the inevitable. The whites threw themselves into the flames, creating bridges of burning bodies that other whites walked across. Jon Snow and Daenerys took to the sky on Rhaegal and Drogon, engaging Viserion in aerial combat. The undead dragon breathed blue flame that froze whatever it touched. They fought through clouds and darkness, while the Night King summoned a blizzard that blinded everyone on the ground. Dragon fighting dragon, fire against ice, life against death. The castle walls were breached. Whites poured through gaps, overwhelmed defenders through sheer numbers. Every fallen defender rose again within moments, turning their army against them. The living were losing. In the Godswood, Theon Greyjoy held the final line with a handful of Ironborn. His men died one by one. Finally, Theon stood alone as the Night King walked toward Bran with deliberate steps. White Walker generals surrounded them. Theon charged with a dragon glass spear. The Night King caught it easily, snapped it, and drove the broken end through Theon's chest. "You're a good man," Bran said. "Thank you." The Night King approached Bran, reaching for his blade, and Arya Stark flew from the darkness. She had spent years training with the Faceless Men, learning to move in silence, to kill with precision. The Night King caught her by the throat with impossible speed, lifting her from the ground. She dropped the Valyrian steel dagger from her right hand, caught it with her left, drove it upward into his chest, into the exact spot where the children of the forest had created him. The Night King shattered like ice, and simultaneously every White Walker shattered, every white collapsed. The entire army of the dead fell in an instant, the magic animating them severed at its source. 100,000 corpses became simply corpses again. The long night had lasted 1 night. The war had been ended by a teenage girl with a Valyrian steel dagger and perfect timing. Melisandre walked out of Winterfell as dawn broke. She removed her ruby necklace. The glamour faded. She became ancient, withered, her true age finally catching up. She collapsed in the snow and died peacefully, released at last. But there was no time for extended grief. Cersei Lannister still held King's Landing. Daenerys turned her attention south, convinced that humanity owed her their loyalty, but something had broken in her. She had lost Jorah, lost Missandei, lost Rhaegal. 2 of her 3 dragons were dead. Her claim was challenged by Jon's better lineage. The dragon magic that had restored her power now amplified her worst impulses. The Targaryen madness came up on the wrong side. King's Landing surrendered. The bells rang, and Daenerys, sitting on Drogon's back above the city, made a choice that damned her. She burned them anyway. Drogon unleashed dragonfire on the city. Street by street, the wildfire caches ignited. Tens of thousands died screaming. Cersei and Jaime were crushed in the rubble, dying together. The greatest city in Westeros became ash. Jon Snow watched the woman he loved become the tyrant she had sworn to destroy. He went to her in the ruined throne room. She spoke of the new world they would build. He kissed her, and while she was distracted, he drove a dagger into her heart. Drogon found them. The dragon roared in anguish and nudged Daenerys's body. Drogon waited for dragonfire, but Drogon's rage found a different target. He turned to the Iron Throne and breathed fire until it melted into slag. The wheel was broken. The game was over. Drogon took Daenerys's body in his claws and flew east, vanishing into legend. The Great Council gathered. Tyrion proposed Bran Stark as king, not because of birthright, but because he was the three-eyed raven, the living memory of the world, a king who could learn from all of history. "Why do you think I came all this way?" Bran said. Sansa declared the North independent. Jon was exiled to the Night's Watch, riding north to disappear beyond the wall with the wildlings. Arya sailed west into uncharted waters, seeking adventures beyond the known world. Magic remained in the world, but changed. The glass candles still burned faintly. Red priests kept their visions. The faceless men continued unchanged. The weirwood network remained accessible to Bran. The wall still stood. The North endured. King's Landing slowly recovered. Bran ruled from a simple wooden throne, refusing to forge another iron throne. Magic entered a new phase. Neither the high sorcery of Valyria nor the dead absence after the dragons died. Present but rare, powerful but controlled. The world had learned what happened when magic ran unchecked. The song of ice and fire had been sung. Jon Snow had played his role not by ruling but by sacrificing everything. The prophecy was fulfilled through restraint rather than power. Dragons would return someday. Magic followed cycles, but for now the wheel had been broken. In the north, wolves howled under stars. In King's Landing, a boy who had become something more than human remembered everything. Magic slept lightly, dreaming of the day it would wake again. Winter came and went, spring arrived, and magic, eternal and patient, waited for its next awakening. The story continues. Heroes rise when needed. Magic returns when required. Memory persists through the longest nights. Sleep well in the knowledge that wonder still exists, that mysteries remain unsolved, that magic, though diminished, has not died. The great tapestry weaves on, thread by thread, voice by voice, into whatever comes next.